calling all forward-thinking estheticians. It's time to redefine the art of skincare and embrace a revolutionary approach that begins with your client's skin cell health. I'm pharmacist Ben Fuchs, welcoming you to Truth Treatment Systems, where beauty begins at the cell. We believe you're not just a beauty professional, you are a healthcare professional. You want to make a positive difference and you want to make a good living, and we will help you do both. We're here to support your out-of-the-box thinking and empower you to question traditional products, outdated formulations, and old-school ingredients. Imagine a world where solutions to the skin's enigmatic conditions lie just beyond the horizon. At Truth, we're not just a skincare brand, we're a movement that encourages you to explore better solutions and find that aha moment that changes the game. You are an artist and a healer of the skin, and we're here to provide the canvas and the tools for you to create tailored protocols, leaving generic ones in the past. Sign up now at truthtreatmentspro.com and receive 2 complimentary mineral-rich electrolyte sheet masks. That's truthtreatmentspro.com, where healthy skin is beautiful skin.
This podcast is sponsored by LAMPROBE. LAMPROBE is a popular aesthetic tool that enables skincare practitioners to rapidly treat a wide variety of common minor skin irregularities, or MSI. Red MSI treated by LAMPROBE include dilated capillaries and cherry angiomas, yellow MSI, cholesterol deposits and sebaceous hyperplasia, and brown MSI treated include skin tags and more. LAMPROBE MSI treatments are non-invasive and deliver immediate results. LAMPROBE can empower your skin practice with these new and highly in-demand services. For more information, visit lamprobe.com. That's LAMPROBE.com. And follow LAMPROBE on social media at LAMPROBE.
Hello and welcome to ASCP and the Rogue Pharmacist with Ben Fuchs. In each episode, we'll explore how internal and external factors can impact the skin. I'm Maggie Stasek, ASCP's Education Program Manager, and joining me is Ben Fuchs, skincare formulator and pharmacist. Hey, Ben.
Hello, Maggie.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Histamines are released by mast cells during allergic reactions, and we sometimes think of allergies as stuffy nose, watery eyes, itchy nose. But histamines have a huge impact on the skin, too.
Wow, you've been doing some research there, Maggie.
I did a little Googling.
A little Googling. Dr. Google.
Yeah.
Histamine is so fascinating. You know, I've been talking about the digestive system and its relationship to disease and relationship to skin since I've been in pharmacy school 40 years ago when I learned about it. And when I started talking about it in the 1980s, 1990s, even the early 2000s, people would think I was just some kind of freakazoid, some kind of Boulder hippy-dippy guy talking about eating your foods. And it kind of people didn't really understand that there was this important connection. And even though it kind of intuitively made sense, nobody really understood why there would be a relationship between what you ate or your digestive health and your skin. Histamine is that link. Histamine is the missing link between that connects the skin and, for that matter, all ALL, all health challenges that are chronic, whether it's heart disease, cancer, reproductive issues, autoimmune diseases, long COVID, chronic Lyme disease that is unresolvable. Any health challenge that you can name that doesn't resolve has a connection to histamine and a leaky gut. And this is why histamine is the missing link, because it turns out there's 3 ways that first let's talk about what histamine is. Histamine is a chemical that the body makes when it's to be secreted when there's an emergency. Histamine causes blood vessels to open up. Histamine will cause fluids to leak. Histamine will cause the body to become hyperactive, and it will cause hyperproliferation of cells. It speeds things up. It turns things on. It's a defense molecule, essentially. So when you're attacked by a bee sting, say a classic example is a bee sting, histamine will be released. That histamine will cause blood vessels in the skin to open up, and then white blood cells can leak out of those blood vessels along with other fluids. You'll get redness, you'll get swelling. And that's a classic example of an acute histamine response, an immediate histamine response. But we can have long-term chronic histamine responses because histamine comes from multiple sources. The most important source in the body, as you said at the beginning, of histamine is in cells called mast cells. These are cells, they're white blood cells, they're cells of the immune system that live throughout the body, but largely in the connective tissue. And this is so important. I'll tell you why in a second. So these mast cells contain histamine, among other inflammatory emergency molecules, immune activating molecules as a protection. So when the body's attacked in some way, whether it's a bee sting or whether it's a food toxin, the mast cell will respond to that emergency by releasing these inflammatory chemicals, histamine being the quintessential one. So that's the first place where histamine gets into histamine levels go up, is from mast cells, immune cells, as part of the immune response. But histamine is also made by bacteria. It's made by bacteria in the gut, the microbiome, bacteria in the microbiome. So one place where you can get histamine is through mast cells, but another place is through these excess bacteria in the small intestine following SIBO. Histamine is inflammatory, will cause inflammation in the intestine. Now you've got all these bacteria, they're producing histamine, they're inflaming the intestinal wall. The histamine can now get into the bloodstream, among other endotoxins or bacterial toxins. So histamine can come from the mast cells. Histamine can come from toxins released from bacteria in the intestine. Now, other toxins that are released into the intestine from bacteria will turn on mast cells. So now when you have leaky gut caused by the histamine and caused by all those bacteria, you've got histamine flowing into the bloodstream, elevating histamine levels, activating the mast cells, causing more histamine to be secreted. Now you have super high levels of histamine. That's called histamine load. And that high histamine load will make you more sensitive to pollen. It'll make you more sensitive to certain foods. It'll make you sensitive to mechanical pressures. It'll make you sensitive to everything. These are people who say, I'm allergic to everything. No matter what I put on my skin, I break out. No matter what I breathe, I break out. When I wear my clothes, some people from tight clothes will break out. When they take a hot shower, they'll break out. These are all signs of elevated histamine and activation of the mast cells. In fact, there's a condition called mast cell activation syndrome. Have you heard of this?
I have, yeah.
MCS. And this is where MCS comes from. So the two of the major places where histamine levels rise and increase histamine load is from the mast cells, and then from bacteria that live in the gut, especially when you're dealing with lots of bacteria like in SIBO. But there's a third place where histamine gets into the body, and that's through food. And these can be foods that people will consider to be good foods. Avocados are high in histamine. Eggplant is high in histamine. Spinach is high in histamine. Fermented foods like yogurt and sauerkraut can be high in histamine. Citrus fruits. You know how some people say, I'm allergic to citrus fruits? What's happening is the citrus fruits contain histamine. And the histamine is causing a histamine response, particularly if you have a high histamine load. So foods that we consider good can actually be bad for us via histamine, particularly if you're dealing with SIBO or you're dealing with mast cell activation syndrome, if you've got a high histamine load. So we have a tendency to blame the food. We want to blame us. There's one really interesting place where histamine shows up, and that's in a bacteria called H. pylori. Have you heard of H. pylori? Okay, so H. pylori should live in the intestine, but it can translocate to the stomach. When it translocates to the stomach inappropriately, one of the things it does, H. pylori, is it stimulates acid secretion. So H. pylori makes histamine. Histamine turns on acid production. For the longest time, when people had ulcers or acid, or even GERD, heartburn, they would get a medicine called Tagamet or Zantac, right? Tagamet and Zantac are antacids. They block histamine. But as it turns out, the histamine is being made by bacteria, H. pylori. So now they give you antibiotics when you have an ulcer or you're producing lots of acid. Not Tagamet, because it's the H. pylori that's making the acid. Likewise, histamine is associated with rosacea via this H. pylori connection. So it turns out that when people have rosacea, they oftentimes have excess H. pylori in the stomach, and that's secreting the histamine. Now, there's other reasons why histamine levels go up, aside from food and aside from mast cell activation and aside from leaky gut and SIBO and bacterial problems. There are also deficiencies in enzymes that break down histamine. There's a particular enzyme called DAO, diamine oxidase, DAO, which is responsible for breaking down histamine. Some people suffer from a DAO deficiency. If you have a DAO deficiency, you may have a problem with histamine, especially if you're a high histamine producer. You can get DAO supplements, and I highly recommend them for people who have these kind of chronic conditions, chronic immune conditions. In fact, if they have any immune condition or if they have any chronic disease, a DAO supplement can help. One of the enzymes that's involved in the detoxification of histamine utilizes methylation. So you've probably heard of methylation, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a methylation issue, an MTHFR deficiency, for example, you may have a problem with excess histamine because you're not going to be able to methylate histamine to detoxify. So using methylating agents, there's a great methylating agent called SAMe. The B complex can help you with methylation. So making sure that you're methylating correctly, also using methylated nutrients, methylated B vitamins can help provide you with methyl agents to help you with histamine detoxification. There's also nutrients that you can use to help detoxify histamine. One of the best is our favorite, vitamin C. Also quercetin, which is a bioflavonoid. You remember when quercetin was being used for COVID? I don't know if that was part of the COVID protocol. And quercetin is used for a lot of chronic health conditions. Why? It's an antihistamine. It's a natural antihistamine. Melatonin is a natural antihistamine. CBD and THC are natural antihistamines. In fact, there's a fragment called PEA, palmitoyl ethanolamide, which is a fatty fragment. That also has antihistamine properties. There's a nutrient called choline, which has antihistamine properties. Zinc is one of the great antihistamine minerals. And zinc has been used to treat all kinds of immune problems. Coenzyme Q10 has antihistamine properties. There's a supplement called betaine. I don't know if you ever heard of betaine. Betaine has antihistaminic properties. And by the way, betaine is also contains glycine, which can also be helpful for building collagen. And as I say, a lot of foods that we consider to be good foods, citrus foods, avocados, bananas, vinegar. I always recommend apple cider vinegar, but some people have a problem with apple cider vinegar, and that could be due to the histamine that it contains. Dried fruits, raisins are especially problematic as a source of histamine. So this is why doing a food diary is so important, and not just by going with good foods and bad foods. I talk to people all the time who have clear signs of histamine intolerance, and redness is always going to involve histamine. Itching is always going to involve histamine. Swelling is always going to involve histamine. And they say, well, I'm gluten-free. I'm not eating gluten. Well, it's much more than gluten. Gluten, can be a problem for some people, and plant defensive molecules, lectins, can be a problem. But it can also be these histamines that are found in foods, especially if you're a high histamine producer. Long story short, do a food diary, elimination diet. If you notice that when you fast, your symptoms resolve, that's a classic sign of a gut problem. Using natural antihistamines, using things that help detoxify histamine like methylating agents, as well as DAO. Use the natural antihistamines. Those can be helpful. And focus on digestive health because that's so darn important.
That concludes our show for today, and we thank you for listening. But if you just can't get enough of Ben Fuchs, the ASCP's Rogue Pharmacist, you can find him at truthtreatments.com. For more information on this episode or for ways to connect with Ben Fuchs or to learn more about ASCP, check out the show notes.